Welcome to the Bloom Where You're Planted podcast from Never Too Late Cafe. I'm your host, Laura Womack. Each week, we sit down for a chat with someone just like you, someone who had an idea, a passion, a dream, or sometimes just a thought, and planted that seed, watched it grow into something they wanted to share with the world. If you have an idea for a topic or someone that would be a guest for the Bloom Where You're Planted podcast, feel free to reach out to us on Facebook, where you can join our Never Too Late Cafe Facebook group. We'd love to hear from you. And I have a very special guest with me today, Robert Dafford. Hi, Robert.
Hi, Laura. Good morning.
So, Robert, where are you currently living?
I live in Lafayette, Louisiana, south part of Louisiana, Cajun country, an old French, old world kind of culture. It's, of course, contemporary America has been there a long time, but it still has a large number of French-speaking citizens, bilingual citizens, French culture, food, cooking, music. It's a very, very interesting place to be.
Very cool. So is that where you're from originally?
Yes.
Oh.
Well, since 57, we moved to Lafayette when I was 6 years old. My parents were living a little farther north in the state at that time with our grandmother, where my dad just got out of the Navy. And we moved down to Lafayette because he wanted to work in the oil field. And so I grew up in Lafayette.
Interesting. So when you say French speaking or bilingual, you mean Creole?
Well, there is a Creole language also, which is a basis in French, but also having been in their own world for so long, that there's a different language that it's French, and it's very similar to Cajun French. Both Cajun French and Creole French are based out of France from several hundred years ago. The Acadians had left France. They were fishermen, mostly from the Normandy area, that were sailing across the Atlantic and fishing. They established a little base in what's now Nova Scotia, established their own colony, and were there for 150 years of freedom, their own world, farming, fishing, orchards, etc. And the British decided they wanted to take it over, and they did so by force, killed about half of the Acadian population, and established an English governor, and began persecuting them, try to force them to give up their French, give up their religion, give up their culture, and assimilate into the English king culture. And after that forced evacuation, which was something of an attempted genocide, most of them left and ended up scattered around the known world at that time, and the largest of them accumulated in South Louisiana, which was controlled by the French at the time, and were isolated in South Louisiana for another 150 years. So their language is still an older form of French, which is interesting to linguists from France and from other cultures. They come here to study that sometimes.
Well, I can tell you're quite a historian, and that has probably influenced what you currently do. So can you tell us as an artist, what art form you do?
Well, I'd be regarded as a realist, representational for sure. And I usually use pretty dramatic lighting and compositions. And I do a lot of historical painting. Back in the 70s, when the French culture in South Louisiana was being wiped out by Americanism, there was a huge effort, a renaissance to keep the French, keep the food, keep the music especially. And the music and the food had a large effect on saving the French culture because it became popular worldwide. Just about everybody in the world knows Cajun music and Cajun food. Mm-hmm. And I set out, in my part in that Renaissance was to try to paint these events that caused the Acadians to end up in South Louisiana. And learning to paint historical subject matter led me to learn how to research, how to seek out experts, how to generate imagery for something that didn't exist. And the act of doing that over the years, parallel to my own mural, my other mural work, some more contemporary than that, led me to become known as a historical painter, and led me eventually, some years later, to Portsmouth, Ohio, where I began painting the history of Portsmouth.
So was Portsmouth your first wall?
No.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I've been painting outside since 69, 70. When I went to University of Louisiana, I was a painter back then. And I was doing a lot of contemporary sign work, imagery and fantastic design, all kinds of fonts and colors and airbrush and, fabricated iron and wood. I and a former partner of mine, John Porcio, transformed the sign business in Lafayette. It was still in the 40s, really. And we got known for being artistic, and it wasn't long before I started getting commissions to do more of the art and less of the signage. And I painted several really large paintings in the late 70s. I had gotten drafted. I spent 4 years in the service. I came back to Lafayette at the end of 75 or early 76. That's when I went to work with John Porcio. And in the late 70s, we had painted several murals around Lafayette. And in 1980, I got a commission to paint the Cars mural in Lafayette, which was a former parking garage that had been turned into office buildings, 10 stories tall. It was the first large-scale work I had done. I painted 50s cars because that's what the building had been used for. It was a parking garage previously. That was parallel with the development of the Acadian culture works. So the Chemainus Festival of Murals on Vancouver Island saw my work and invited me to come out there and paint. That was the first downtown development project based on attracting tourists to their little town, a dying little sawmill town. They turned to the idea of tourism to save them. And they did it by painting their own history. And they had seen my historical paintings of the Acadian exile. So they flew us out there, my brother and I, and we painted a huge mural about the old mill, the giant sawmill that had kept them alive for 100 years and was now out of business. Painting that mill painting on Vancouver Island got me invited to a number of other historical mural downtown development projects. I did several in Washington State for several years. And one of the projects in Canada, the same people who had started that project, started a project in Steubenville, Ohio. So I got invited to it. And the project in Steubenville, Ohio, where I painted 5 murals over those same years, 80, 89, 90, 91, 92, got me invited to Portsmouth, Ohio, to start a similar project for them to try to revitalize their old riverfront district. And it turned into the biggest thing of my life because I ended up accepting the invitation to paint the entire wall, which is 2,500 feet of murals, about half a mile.
Wow.
And worked on it for 30 years now. We still paint a new mural every year. We've also begun restoring all of the old paintings in Portsmouth. And since that start in 92, 93, I have done similar projects in Paducah, Kentucky, Maysville, Kentucky, Point Pleasant, West Virginia, Vicksburg, Mississippi, and a variety of other cities who want to revitalize their old riverfront districts. And I have now a pretty well-proven record of being successful in attracting visitors. Both the Portsmouth project and the Paducah project have had over 1 million visitors in their 30-year life. If you think every one of those people buys a Coke or a tank of gas or lunch or a souvenir, you can see easily there's been an $8 or $10 million impact over the years as a result. And it was partly that the state of Ohio agreed to the importance, the social, economic, and political importance of the project, and has given us a grant to do restoration on the older murals in Portsmouth. We'll be back up there in June of this year, 95, to begin doing the second half of this giant restoration project.
So you also have done projects overseas, correct?
Yes, our in Lafayette has sister cities in France, and Belgium, and Canada, and we have several in Africa and Mexico and Japan, which are more tentative. But I have made agreements between the city of Lafayette and the city of Suresnes, which is on the west side of Paris, to go and paint images of this giant flying violin. The first one was unveiled in Lafayette in 1988 at the parade of the opening of Festival International, and all the festival directors helped pull the veil. And I had a meeting with them to offer this. We would fly to their town, our sister city, and paint this flying violin in their city as a visual symbol of their connection with us. And these violins then stitch our cities together. We did the painting. The city of Lafayette paid my airfare, and they provided hotel, food, scaffolding, and an assistant. And the mural was a gift from my city to their city. So in this way, I got to go to several cities in Canada and in France and in Belgium and paint our flying violin, which led to other commissions in some of those states over the years.
Amazing. And so you became an ambassador of your city as well.
Yes. And everywhere I go, I always make a gumbo for my RNA etouffee, Acadian French cooking and music. We always do that wherever we go for our clients.
Have you done that in Portsmouth?
Yeah, I've cooked a bunch of years that I've been there. I've cooked for the people on the board of directors and friends of the project, and friends. After living there every summer and fall for 30 years, I've made a lot of friends in the Portsmouth area. I cook for them every year. And they cook for me too, although I don't find much comparison.
So you're part-time in Louisiana, part-time in Portsmouth, Ohio. So you kind of are back and forth a lot, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. I travel, and I travel to lots of other states too over the years. I have projects in Kentucky, West Virginia, far western Kentucky, Colorado, Tennessee, Georgia, upstate New York, Ontario, California, Texas, Arkansas. I've traveled quite a bit. I usually am home by Thanksgiving, and I stay in Lafayette or in South Louisiana. Like right now, we're in Metairie, which is a big suburb of New Orleans. We're painting our fourth mural in Metairie over the years. And I commute. I don't commute, but I'll go back home every weekend. I'm working 3 or 4 days a week on this project and doing several other things in Lafayette over the weekend. Lafayette's a busy place. There are plays and symphonies, and there's an outdoor music event every Friday downtown Alive. There are art walks once a month, which is this coming weekend, and I participate. I have a lot of friends in Lafayette, artist friends who show. I have a lot of friends in bands who play in the clubs and bars and restaurants, and I have a pretty busy social life in Lafayette and New Orleans. Oh. So I go back and forth quite a bit.
Sounds like you get the best of all the worlds you go to. So, one of the things I can say that I have met you before, that's sort of a disclaimer, but one of the things I do know that you not just do the paintings, but you go before those people that are the decision makers, you do presentations, and that's a different skill in itself, because that's the funders. And so, how did you learn that skill? Because that's completely different than just doing artwork.
Mm. Well, it was kind of trial by fire. And when I was younger, it was very difficult to go before the board of directors in these smaller cities in Portsmouth usually was made up of a few, a number of individuals in their little downtown area who owned properties or who were involved in economic development or downtown development revitalization efforts in their little towns, and they put their faith in this project. And I had to go before them and look at the subjects they might want me to deal with. Say it was a famous locomotive that was built in their town that ran there for, I don't know, 75 years or something. I would find local archives, find photographs, talk to train enthusiasts. I realized when I was painting the Acadian exile, I realized that if I got something wrong, some historians were going to call me on it right away.
Mm.
And so I looked at details of uniforms, what kind of weapons. You can't paint a 1793 rifle in a 1755 painting. They changed the hats, they changed the insignias, they changed the buttons. Different soldiers had different uniforms in different regions. And it was back then in the late 70s, early 80s, even in the 90s, there was no internet. You had to go to libraries and archives. And so I learned how to research a subject and have all the ammunition I could have when I went before the board to say, look at this photograph of this train. That's a terrific photograph. And look at this sky. And these characters that's the era you want to present. They're wearing clothes from that era. And I would try to put them together in a sketch, and I would struggle and struggle to make a rendering that was accurate, but also that would knock their eyes out. So they'd say, oh, wow, that's great painting. You surely can do the mural. But I found that to be really hard to do. And I struggled with that until I was near 50 before I had enough of a track record that the boards of directors, who were insurance salesmen and various business people, governmental people, who don't generally know anything at all about art. They often had a lot of bad ideas, a lot of good ideas. And I had to learn how to diplomatically steer them away from bad ideas and to trust me to give them what I thought were good ideas. Over the years, as I said, my track record bore out my abilities in that area. And I learned that unbeknownst to me, I had an ability to have an ability to talk to people in a town, people on the street and in the library and in City Hall and at the local university or schools, where I'm trying to track down photographs or paintings about that subject and talk to people. I was truly interested in what people had to say. And I learned that I have skill for picking up cues, information, somehow intuitively, that would affect the way the painting would look. And I developed this ability that I did not know I had when I was younger. I noticed that my paintings were always very well liked by the people who lived in the places where I went. But I gradually came to rely on that as a skill that I have that I didn't know I had, that got developed by being forced to convince some people who often don't know history. But I learned to form a committee for the project and to ask that they have local historians and a local arts council person and a local business person and finance and hotel and paint and scaffold. There were all these all these components you have to make big paintings. And I learned pretty quickly to get representatives of all those businesses on a committee and talk over the whole project with them so that they could provide all of those services in kind and take that money out of the budget. So they would have to, it was hard for smaller towns to raise enough money to paint these big paintings, and do them well and have enough time. I've never had a budget that, no matter how big of a budget, that covered everything I did all the way to the end, because we keep on finding more and more imagery and information that makes for a better painting or for a better explanation of that facet of their history. And I'm circling back to several things at once here. Once I was able to say to the committee, this is the concept. We'll have this train, these people, this sunset. Here's the old, which is now the Market Square, the old train station. These are the things I want to include, and this is the kind of color scheme I want to go with. But as we begin painting, we're going to discover more and more and more information that's going to make it a better painting as it goes. Information that I can't find here in Louisiana to tell you about. I can't completely develop the painting until I'm there and digging into local resources and uncovering things nobody realizes exist or that would make it such a difference to the painting. So I gradually got the ability 25 years ago to quit having to make a beautiful finished rendering. I would tell, why spend $2,000 making this beautiful rendering that's going to change anyway? I'd rather have the $2,000 in the budget to make the mural, to make the painting. And they saw the sense in that. And as I said, with the development of a track record, I was freed of that task of having to make an award-winning presentation piece to be able to get to do the giant piece.
Oh, so you were asked to do that before you actually started the big project.
Oh, yeah. In the old days, 70s, 80s. Like I said, these are people that don't know anything about art. They don't have any idea how art is made or what the process is, much less the difficulty of painting on a giant scale, realism. But so they wanted to know exactly what you were going to paint, because I'll give you a really good example. In Steubenville, one of the first murals I did, they sent me a really poor photograph taken in the back of a Chinese laundry. And this Chinese laundry had been there, I don't know, years and years, generations. And the people who owned it were beloved in the community. But the picture they sent me was terrible. And I thought about the timelessness and the multi-dimensional relationships that these people had developed within the community. And the rendering that I came up with had the dark ceiling had kind of become the night sky with stars, and the ground where some people carrying a bag of laundry walking across the street into the building had turned into grass. And it was a metaphorical piece, but I made the mistake of saying surreal to I said, it's kind of, in a way, kind of a surreal thing. That was it. Conversation shut down. We don't want no surrealism around here. You're supposed to be painting absolute realistic pictures of these people. We don't want no surrealism. And I tried to back out of it saying, well, now this was back in probably 88, 89. And I learned that they really liked the drawing. They rejected the idea because they thought it was surreal. I had to learn how to talk to the clientele and bring drawings that were as good as possible, and hope that they just trusted me to proceed. They were dubious about my renderings sometimes. Oftentimes, the committees that would hire us, the historical mural painters in those days, would own the rendering, and they would later have a collection which they would auction off to raise money for the project, which was reasonable. But that was another problem for me and for a lot of artists. You put a heart and soul into making a beautiful award-winning rendering, Well, that's several $1,000s of your time and effort. And it's hard to just give it up to, okay, you have it, you do what you want. They own the copyright to it. You signed all kinds of difficult things in these agreements back in those days to just to get the job, just to get to be able to paint this big painting that you wanted to do. And so it was a relief to me year by year throughout the 90s. I had less and less problem with that kind of restrictions on developing the work. And they came to see the sense of it too, that it's going to develop as I go. Now, I've had serious painters that I met when they were very young, like Herb Rowe, who was 19 in Portsmouth, Ohio, when I met him, who was all into my process. I developed a whole process that makes it feasible to do these giant things in a shorter period of time and less cost. It requires having a couple of helpers. But as I got better and better at designing on the fly, Herb and Brett, some other painters I worked with, they got better and better at doing what the committee wanted, which was to design an exact replica of an exact painting of what you're going to do. When they get out to the wall, they just duplicate the painting and they spend a whole lot less time and trouble. They don't have anything left to develop. They developed it all on the computer in their hotel room before they ever got there. I don't like just replicating a picture on the wall. I like developing the picture as I go and incorporating things I never would have thought of. People I'd never met who brought me a picture of their grandfather that worked in that plant for 45 years. Those kinds of developments happen on the fly. Other artists I know say it's too risky. It's very, very difficult to have enough design skill to incorporate things on the fly and have the composition turn out. But for me, that's the way it works best. I like to design it on location because when you're in your studio in Lafayette designing this picture and you get on the site and don't realize there is a red building right next to that wall that absolutely kills all the colors in your picture. Or they don't realize it's down a slope and you're looking down at it and you need a completely different horizon line in order to make the space look real. And that's one thing I do really well is make space. People always feel like they can look into or walk into my paintings. And that is because I adjust the horizon line, the point of view, the perspective plan is adjusted at that place, for that place, in that place. And you cannot do that from your desk in another city. You can sketch up a concept, but if you don't have the freedom to adjust color, point of view, lines of perspective, things that need to be included that you didn't expect that are surrounding you, then you don't have the right, then you don't have the means to make it the best painting you can make it. So I like designing on the fly, and it is part of not having to be nailed down by an exact rendering before I start. And that's all of that sounds like I don't know, woo-woo stuff to the boards of directors who only know hammers and nails. They don't talk about inspiration and intuitiveness and development of a project on the fly and adjusting your design as you go. Your composition's fluid until you reach that spot where it's just working just right. But with age, as I said, they've trusted me to do that. So
it's good that your reputation has given you more freedom through the years.
Absolutely.
So this podcast is called Bloom Where You're Planted, and I always ask everyone what that quote means to them. So what does it mean to Robert?
Well, it's exactly what happened to me. I was planted in South Louisiana in an old world culture. French speaking, French food, French music. And when I was overseas, I realized the cultures in southern Italy, southern France. I lived in Greece, and I lived in Italy and in Spain. And when I would come back to Lafayette year by year, I began to realize the culture I grew up in South Louisiana has more in common with those cultures, old world Europe, than it did with the America blooming in the 60s and 70s. Was, we all of a sudden we had national television, national radio, national newspapers. Everything was kind of monolithic at that time. But I had been planted in a place where that was slow to arrive. And when it did arrive and began steamrolling the old world culture of the Acadian people, Acadien, it's pronounced Acadien, and Cajun just somehow became Cajun, in case people don't know that. But well, I had been planted there, and when I saw practitioners of the music and the food and the culture, like Michael Duce, the great violinist, Zachary Richard, the great show musician, and Barry Ancelet, the great scholar and multicultural culturalist, I began to say, well, I want to help this too. Our downtown development started at another place I was planted, downtown. I came to realize I'm a downtown revitalization person by nature. I want to see my old downtown come back. I wanted to paint murals like I had seen in big cities in the East and the West. And so I painted big murals in my downtown. That was my blooming, literally, giant flowers and butterflies and birds. Look at what we're losing, y'all, if we don't pay attention to it. So they were multi-purpose pictures. But that was a part of my blooming. How do I help save this culture? It's unique, it's special. How do I help save our environment? How do I help save my downtown? And how do I help save myself as an artist? I bloomed there because of what was there. And when I got to Portsmouth and was planted there year after year after year, I began to see what was there. And it's Portsmouth that is in these paintings. It's Portsmouth people, it's Portsmouth history that made these paintings bloom, made this project bloom into what it is. And if you're responsive to your environment and your people and what's in you, how can you help but become that? So bloom where you are is just a way of describing what it is I've done, I think, all my life. It wasn't, I wasn't in the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. I wasn't in the, I wasn't in the MoMA in New York. I wasn't in the Chicago Institute. I was in Portsmouth, Ohio. So, okay, what's the best thing I can do here? What's the best we can bloom into here? And that's what has become my entire career, and thinking, actually believing that that's where I was supposed to be, and that's what I was supposed to do. And I have lived a lot of my life believing that I'm doing what I am supposed to be doing, where I'm supposed to be doing it. And that's why it's been the wonderful experience it's been in my life.
So what words of wisdom would you give someone that wants to do what you're doing or have done?
As a muralist or as an artist?
Both in general?
I have to say, most artists in America, well, in contemporary times, we all study art history, and in our culture and in Western culture, we're given the mythos of the lone genius struggling alone in the attic, trying to invent a new ism. And everything is in modern art has been influenced by that. You want to be a Picasso, or you want to be a Miro, or all the heroes. When I was in college, it was abstract expressionism, and that was what everybody wanted to be. I had a different path to follow, and it took me a long time to learn to see the difference between my mission and modern art mission. Their mission, the university mission, is to teach you to think about what is art and become one of the artists at the edge of that frontier. What is art? And be knowledgeable and skilled and able to push the boundary of what is art. And I totally respect what that is, but it's not what I do. Well, I'm more of a community development person. I have a whole different kind of sociological makeup and different reasons for what I do. Blooming where I am means everybody else there is blooming too. That's so. If you want to be a muralist, it depends. Most muralists are trying to impose their own vision and an environment, whereas with me, I'm looking in the environment and saying what needs to be here. What needs to be here, and that's the advice I give to anybody with my kind of feelings, because I have an entire history of downtown development, also redevelopment, revitalization, old riverfronts. What needs to be here? It's what I always ask and look around and try to absorb intuitively. That's advice I give to artists, because I see a lot of murals painted in places that really don't belong there. They have nothing to do with the people or the place at all, and they stick out. And another thing I would advise is to really look into the process of making your big paintings, because so many, I don't know why, it may be partly due to our success, but there are now like thousands and thousands of muralists. Everybody wants to be a muralist, and they don't know anything about the process, and their paintings fall apart in 5 years, and they look bad, and nobody is going to fix them, and they look worse. And at the end of this fad, a lot of businesses are going to be kind of aggravated. They got this failed painting on the side of the building because the artist didn't study anything about how to get longevity, how to get harmoniousness and longevity. Those are two things I think you should study. You should try to find out about.
Well, Robert, it has been a joy to have you on. And so I really, really thank you so much for being a guest. And I hope to catch, what's up next for you? We're right now in 2025. So what's next for Robert?
Well, we're 1 week away from finishing a huge painting here in New Orleans, a giant landscape. There's going to be a park built, a very heavily landscaped parking lot. And we're making this giant Louisiana landscape in the background of the park to put some some country, a bayou, some cypress trees, some giant oaks. The only clue they had for me was they wanted to see giant oaks. So, okay, we'll paint giant oaks. And that is very near completion. I'm doing a painting for a lawyer friend of mine of Abraham Lincoln as a young man, as a circuit judge riding through Indiana and the countryside when he was a young man. I'm drawing a blank. I have several projects. I'm doing some portraits of my in-laws.
Oh,
And I have a few other projects that I'll be working on in April and May, and I will be back in Portsmouth, Ohio in June, and I'll spend a little time in Paducah, Kentucky, and a little time in Point Pleasant, West Virginia over this summer. But we are in the second half of the restoration grant for the state of Ohio, so we'll be spending almost 6 months in Ohio restoring the older paintings, the ones that are 20, 25. We've hit the 30-year-old paintings. We're on the 20 and 25-year-old paintings.
wow.
So I'll be up there, and that'll last until Thanksgiving. And then I have, I'll tentatively get started on some more projects here in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Lafayette next December, January, February, March of 26.
What a busy life. What a busy life. Well, again, Robert, thank you so much for being a guest. And I hope to see more of your works. I am based in Portsmouth, Ohio, and I get to enjoy your work all the time, and it's been a pleasure to meet you and talk with you.
So as our time comes to a close, remember to keep creating, keep sharing, and keep supporting each other. And remember to bloom where you're planted. Bye for now.